All right, good afternoon. I'll call this work session to order. Ms. Thomas, roll call, please.
Mayor Walker,
Present.
Vice Mayor McGill, I see that you're present. I can't hear you. Okay, Councillor Hill,
Here.
Councillor Payne,
Here.
Councillor Snook,
Here.
and I think Ms. McGill is retrying her video.
Sina, can you hear us?
If you can hear me, I can't hear anybody.
Okay,
We can hear you
we
now.
can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear us? No. All right, so we have two reports today, the city's monthly financial report and a recovery roadmap update from the Economic Development Office. So we'll start with the city monthly financial update.
Thank you. Brian, if you could go ahead and start the presentation, please. Okay, thank you. So good morning, council, or excuse me, good afternoon. This afternoon, we're going to provide council with the last monthly snapshot of the revenues and expenses with the general fund and utility funds for the current fiscal year. The following slides, we're just going to go over some of the highlights of these monthly reports, and more detailed information can be found in the report that was given to council and what is posted online on the budget office website. Before we begin, as always, I want to a big thank you to the revenue team that helps develop these projections and monitor our revenues as we go throughout the fiscal year. This first slide just presents the data graphically to show the initial overall decline in our revenues. But again, based upon our most recent revised projections, showing this slight increase for our final projections in 21. The top line here shows what the total revenue was as it was adopted. The next line was what we had presented to council in April and last month as far as our revenue projections. And then the blue is our current revision, which is where we now anticipate finishing out the fiscal year. And as you can see, based upon the current conditions and what we're seeing in terms of revenues, things are continuing to trend in a positive direction, which has led to an overall increase in our revenue projections from what we showed in April. And we're looking at approximately 7.2 million or 3.8% decline from the original adopted budget. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I just wanted to highlight a few of the more notable changes from the previous forecasts. Overall, based upon the most recent revisions, we're now projecting our general fund revenues will be approximately 7.2 million below what the FY21 adopted amounts were, but that's a $920,000 increase roughly from what we were showing you in April and May as our revenue forecasts. We're continuing to see some volatility month to month in some of our larger economic driven revenues, sales, meals, lodging, but we've been seeing more of a sustained positive trend in these areas. And so the receipts for that we've collected in the past few months have actually looked better compared to the receipts for the prior months. And therefore, based on these new amounts that we're collecting, we've increased our projections for these through three revenues: $156,000 for meals, $328,000 for sales, and $127,000 for lodging. The biggest jump from what we showed you last month is in our BPOL revenue. Our initial projections for the fiscal year, that is, were approximately 1.2 million less than what we have actually collected. This revenue source is dependent upon prior year receipts. And so at the time of the original budget projections, we still didn't know exactly how deep the revenue reductions to the local businesses would be. And we took a conservative approach to reduce our projections by approximately 25% for FY21 from what we had initially thought they would be. Fortunately, overall, we did not see as steep a decline as that 25% for the gross receipts in calendar year 2020. And so we've exceeded our initial projections by almost, as I said, 1.2 million. One other area that we're really seeing a increase in it is in real estate. What we were showing in January and April of 2022, this revenue was slightly reduced from the original budget projection. That was based upon the collection rates we had seen in December at the December 2020 deadline, which was slightly lower, about a percentage point lower. However, the real estate tax revenue has improved slightly over the course of the fiscal year, and we're now projecting that we're going to come in much, much closer to budget than what we had shown in the previous month. So we're only slightly off, about $50,000 off from our initial FY21 projections. The final piece we want to show on this revenue is the Parks and Recreation revenue, because it's one of the larger decreases. It decreased about $210,000 from what we had been showing in January and April. And that's mainly based on the fact that we opened our facilities about a month later than we had originally anticipated for when we were coming up with those projections. And there were a few that were not fully opened, a few facilities that were not going to fully open for FY21. So therefore we had to adjust the revenues downward based on those two factors. Again, next slide, please, Brian. So again, these are some of the larger revenue sources, and you can see kind of the difference from the overall change from what was our adopted budget to the current forecast in a lot of these areas. And while what we're seeing is certainly positive news for the city, next slide, please, Brian. Positive news for the city in that we're now looking at a 7.42 $million decrease from what we had initially projected. We don't want to, this is just one side of the picture, and the expenditures have to be considered as well. And so as we look at the expenditures, we want to make sure that while we are seeing positive indications on the revenue side, we're not losing sight of that's just half of our financial picture for the city. Next slide. So here is I know a lot of this information that in this presentation is repeated month after month. And again, as we move forward through this and things begin to normalize or whatever that may look like, we anticipate kind of coming back with written reports on a monthly basis and doing these reports on more of a quarterly basis when we are coming with any updates to any revisions. And obviously, should any significant developments materialize, we would come to council and discuss those. But we're hopefully, as we move forward, I'm not sitting here month after month regurgitating the exact same spiel that you guys have heard for 6 months in a row now, and we'll be able to do this more expeditiously and be a better usage of your time. As we look at the expenditure pictures, right now as a point of reference, we're through about 11 months or 91.7, 92% of the way through the fiscal year. Again, I always caution, expenditures don't spread evenly over all 12 months, but you get the general idea. And so overall, our expenditures are at 81%. Schools, this is showing with our contribution to schools and our maintenance and pupil transportation contracts. The one item on this particular screen that is above budget is the Healthy Families and Community section. And again, this is because it's reflecting all 4 quarterly payments for most of the outside agencies. This category also includes all of the rent relief and tax relief programs that the city has done, and we've paid those out for the fiscal year as well. Non-departmental activities, this is our transfers, the majority of which have been posted, and the rest will be posted at the end of the fiscal year once we know what the amounts necessary will be. And so that we expect those to continue to climb. Again, as I said, overall, we're at approximately 81% utilized on the expenditure side, but part of that is because of the COVID reserve we set aside, which remains unspent, and that's also in the non-departmental activities section. And that 82% is of the $199 million current budget, which, as you can see, is quite a bit higher than our revised revenue projections. So again, we're still continuing to monitor these expenditures, because if we were to expend our entire revenue budget, we could see some potential issues there. Next slide, please. So we've discussed this final slide several times, but we've retitled it to managing the variance because it's now more than just managing the shortfall. We want to manage the budget variances in both the expenditures and the revenue side. And so we're continuing to meet on a regular basis. As I said before, this, the COVID reserve, we set aside approximately 6.7 million as part of the budget process, and there's the CARES funding, departmental savings. As we're now 11 months into the fiscal year, we've lost some of the flexibility on the expenditure levers we can pull on the departmental side, but this is an estimate of what we could potentially see in terms of departmental savings. And as we've discussed with council through several meetings, should we need to use the ARPA funds to cover any remaining budget variance that's not covered by the other means mentioned here, we know those figures after the close of the fiscal year and have the final, we will have those final audited amounts in November, December timeframe. We should have some estimates, hopefully sooner, but we can't guarantee. We're currently working to come up with some of the estimates for the revenue replacement side based on the federal guidance and other guidance from these organizations. But don't want to put any numbers out there because I feel it would be irresponsible to throw out draft estimates at this point, which could substantially change as we go through and look at and get a complete picture of our final revenue and expenditure estimates. Again, it looks, don't want everyone to think that the work's done. Yes, we only have a couple weeks left in the fiscal year, but we're still going to have to work hard to try to require the ongoing effort to manage these variances and make sure that the city comes out in a positive financial state. So
Ryan,
that I'll take any questions.
can you hear me all right?
Yep.
To that end, I'm just curious, what is a good time frame by which we will have kind of a more ground? I mean, obviously we don't get our audit finishes at the end of the calendar year, but when do we feel like we'll have a good standing to understand like where the dollars are and where we might have flexibility to use other dollars for other needs? I'm just trying to get a sense for timeline and when that decision making might be able to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we're currently working with the city manager to come up with a time frame and a timeline to be able to present something on the ARPA side. We know there's some potential more immediate needs than sooner. The things may be needed sooner rather than later. So we'd like to try to get in front of as many needs as we can. But it's hard to say because with a lot of the revenues, there's a 45-day accrual period, which means you're into the middle of August before we know where all those revenues are. Hopefully we'll have a better picture or estimate sooner than that. Same thing with certain expenditures, that there's longer accrual periods on certain things. So we'll continue to work through that. Hopefully we'll, I don't want to speak for the city manager, but we're going to try to come up with something, this summer to be able to put in front of council, but we just don't have, I wish I could give you an exact time frame. Oh, well, we can do that, 15 days after the close of the fiscal year or something. It's just because of the different variances with the various revenue sources and expenditures, it's hard to nail down a time frame, which is why we tend to use the November, December timeframe, because that's when the audit's completed. I mean, obviously we'll have figures prior to that, but we'll come in front of council with something sooner than that, but we'll just not 100% sure at this point.
Understood. I just, obviously with it, especially the ARP dollars, just knowing how much we can play with versus how much is going to be committed to this current budget is just going to be a time that we're all looking forward to understanding like where the limits are. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And it would also be helpful to know the expenditure side a little bit more, because if we had cut out some items from departments, are we bringing those back in? I mean, just to have a better sense of what we're doing, what does making up the revenue mean? And, that'll be helpful, especially with the community needs. And if the city is rebounding the way we are, understanding that we're not in the clear with the pandemic yet, and that
Right.
it turn, a possibility that could turn. But there are citizens, businesses, nonprofits that are doing much worse than we are. So if there's something, that we can do to know sooner than later that we're okay, that would be helpful.
And Mayor and Council, I think one thing we'll be looking at doing is maybe even, I'm trying to think of the best way to put it, somewhat borrowing from ourselves a little bit. If we don't have the final numbers in a timely manner that makes us feel comfortable, we may just take a look at dividing up, replacing our revenues between the two tranches that we'll receive. So in simplest of terms, if we had X million dollars of revenue loss, we may just replenish half of that with the first tranche and the second half with the second tranche of money. That way we could start having some cash flow that would be available to the agencies as you just discussed.
Are there any other questions?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Mr. Engel, you're good to.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Good afternoon, and just here to give you an update on our recovery roadmap process. This process emanated out of a discussion the council had at the beginning of the budget season late last year, November, December, where you indicated that helping businesses recover was one of your priorities as you were considering priorities for the budget year. So we took that as direction to start to develop a plan to do that. Starting early in 2021, we gathered significant stakeholder input through several methods, one of which was one-on-one follow-up phone calls or visits with folks that had received aid from us last year through the various grant programs that came out of our office. We also did a stakeholder survey that had over 100 respondents. And then we did kind of focus groups, group meetings that a couple of you were part of in March and April. Appreciate the input that you all made as part of that process. So we had several hundred folks involved throughout all of those different stakeholder listening opportunities. And ultimately what we came up with is a recovery roadmap. I'm going to share my screen here to show you the graphic representation of the ultimate initiatives. Hopefully you all can see that now. You've seen some dark blues and light blues on a rectangular document here with four big categories: financial assistance, training and resources, infrastructure needs, and marketing and advertising. So ultimately, we have 15 initiatives here that we believe our office can have some impact on over the next 12 to 18 month period as the business community recovers from the pandemic. There is, and this was included in your packet for today, a written narrative document that accompanies this that has a little bit more detail on all of these. But for purposes of today, I wanted to use this graphic as a way to kind of focus on 15 initiatives, and I won't go into detail on all of them. You can read through them, ask questions as you have them, but I want to highlight a couple in each category, and we'll go from there. So based on the stakeholder input, these are the four key categories, probably not very surprising given what occurred during the pandemic, but financial assistance was a top category and was of great need last year and still is to some extent this year. So not a big surprise that showed up again. So I want to highlight the first one here, 1.1, which is execute 2 rounds of the BRACE grant. BRACE grant is a newer grant that we have. We did this last April as one of the first initiatives to help combat the challenges of the pandemic. And BRACE stands for Building Resiliency Amongst Charlottesville Entrepreneurs. And it's a takeoff on a longstanding grant program known as the ACE grant, which stands for Advancing Charlottesville Entrepreneurs. It's also included in this category, but a little farther down in your list here. But Brace is really focused on trying to build resiliency amongst a business in a business, help with a pivot of a business model, perhaps to like a mobile ordering or some new way of doing business to show that they can adapt to changing circumstances. So it's less about helping pay rent and more about helping the business evolve to a new model and create that resiliency that is ultimately needed to create long-term surviving businesses. So these funds are intended to support that effort that a business may propose. And we take application, review those, and grant funds based upon their proposals and their categories of need. Obviously, we're looking to impact and help businesses that have been most impacted. So service industry, hospitality, retail, et cetera, that have been most impacted would float to the top, as well as our socially disadvantaged owned businesses, minority businesses, et cetera, which we also featured in our small business relief grants last year. Those would also receive priority in this category. So we anticipate doing 2 rounds of that. I'm sorry?
Yeah, your volume is going in and out.
Okay, I'm trying to scooch up a little closer, maybe speak up.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So the Brace grant is the first one I wanted to talk about in our financial assistance category. There's a couple other items there, including our ACE grant, which is a smaller grant. We would anticipate doing that in the latter part of the fiscal year, with the Brace grant happening in the first part of the fiscal year. We also heard from some businesses that they're challenged with technical assistance to create maybe an advertising campaign or a website and things like that. So we've put in here number 1.2 is intended to create opportunities where we would assist a business to create the collateral that they need to participate in one of our marketing and advertising opportunities, which I'll touch on in a minute. But that was something that we heard from the businesses, particularly the very new businesses that might not have a fully fleshed out website and need that kind of assistance. So we would find that assistance and connect them, and then pay for that up to a certain amount to help them get ready for doing more business. So moving to the second category, which is really training and resources, workforce development initiatives fall into this category. There's a number of them here. I'll highlight 2 of them for your consideration today. The first is our Go Hire program, which we've had for a number of years. This actually helps employers hire somebody or train an incumbent employee, and we help pay for that training, or we help with a wage subsidy over the first 6 to 8 weeks of their employment. This has been well received over the years, and it has helped employers hire somebody, and help kind of, figure out if they're going to be a good fit and share that burden of their early weeks of employment. Or if they do the training component, then they have an opportunity to upskill somebody that's already in the business and keep them for a longer period of time. So we've had good success with that program. Currently, right now, it's simply finding folks for employment is the greater challenge. So this program will be helpful, but we need to help employers find those available employees and match those skills. At the moment is a greater need than the actual being able to pay for hiring or for the training. But we anticipate doing that program as part of our work plan this year. And the other one that I wanted to mention here was 2.4, which is focused on the hospitality industry and creating training program that would better connect employees with job opportunities in that sector. As everyone knows, the hospitality industry has been most affected by the pandemic, and the hospitality industry has been growing in the Charlottesville area. So we see this as an opportunity. This is a bigger initiative. It's going to take a little longer to kind of develop. We have done growing opportunities or GO programs in the hospitality area before. We may repeat 1 or 2 of those programs. The Go Cook program comes to mind, which helps the restaurant industry specifically. But I think ultimately this might be a bigger program. Some communities have created hospitality academies, which are kind of ongoing programs that people and employees engage in over a period of time, not just a one-hit quick training program, but a longer engagement to keep and allow people to grow within the hospitality industry. There's some indication that the county has some interest in participating in something like this. And the Visitors Bureau has also indicated that there's certainly a definite need in the industry at the moment, and they would be willing to certainly assist in connecting us with folks that are interested on the employer side. So those are the two I wanted to highlight there. Moving on to the third big category, which is infrastructure related. The main one to point out here, and I'm going to ask Jason Ness, who's on my team and on board with us today, to dive into this one as he's done the research on this. But there's state law that goes into effect here on July 1st, changed some of the rules around outdoor refreshment areas with regard to alcohol and where it can be and how it can be moved around in an outdoor area. So that change in law presents a potential opportunity for us here in Charlottesville and throughout the state. Folks are looking at this, but I'll let Jason jump in and kind of describe what this is and what we see as the opportunity to help with the business community as well. Jason?
Yep, thank you, Chris. The designated outdoor refreshment area concept has been on the books with ABC for quite some time, and really the fundamental change that takes effect on July 1st is now the localities in the city in this case have more control over these type of events. In the past, it was a permitted system, both at the state and the locality. The new legislation now will allow for cities to create ordinances to control these. Just in brief research, it seems like it's a pretty wise move on ABC's part to streamline the process and make it more efficient. The goal of these areas is to increase economic vibrancy and entertainment. And so allowing these areas to happen with less red tape, I think is the direction that ABC is going and working with localities to make it happen. Without getting into too much detail, the basic concept is that adults would be allowed to purchase a 16-ounce cup from a business that sells alcohol and take it into the public area. So in this case, it would be the downtown mall. You couldn't take a cup from one ABC license holder to another, so you could not go from restaurant to restaurant, but you could go into retailers if they would allow those drinks to come into there. So that's the basic idea. And as this legislation was being discussed in Richmond, we had some business owners and some restaurant owners reach out that were interested in looking at this and had been having some meetings with them, been talking with ABC agents and their legal counsel to kind of understand all the regulation rules and requirements that would be needed to establish this. And the way that we are looking at through our office is how do we take this opportunity to leverage that to help the downtown area and also how to help the entire community. So we are in talking with the Ix Art Park that's holding a community block party fall event this series, or excuse me, a community block party series this fall to highlight nonprofits in the area that have been obviously hit hard, as the mayor mentioned earlier. And with this DORA concept, we would be able to do that on the mall as well, where nonprofits could set up tables. There'll be busking stages for entertainers and performers, as well as work with the business community to be more vibrant, have the retailers have some retail space out front of their stores, as well as more performers and musicians around the mall throughout the fall. So that's kind of where we're at. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer, but if not, I'll let Chris take it over.
Okay, thank you, Jason. And we do want to get some direction from you all on this particular one, but we'll catch up to that at the end here. I'll just go through the next few items here, and we'll have time for that discussion. The other item under the infrastructure category is kind of this, what we're calling, for lack of a better term, is a biannual cleanup day. We often hear from the business community, and this came through in our focus group sessions, that you know, the lights out or the paint's chipped or the bricks need to be power washed, things of this nature. And this reoccurs, even though our park staff and our public works staff have routines for all of these things. You know, hitting it on a very specific, you know, schedule with some input from the businesses just before it happens to what the key issues are at that particular time would be of benefit and interest to the business community. We've had conversations with parks and they believe this is a reasonable approach and a doable thing, particularly for our key business corridors. So that's something we'd like to implement as well coming out of the pandemic. And then moving into the final category, which is marketing and advertising. We have a number of items here, one of which is underway, and that's the number 4.3 there, which is a buy local campaign. You may recall we did a very quick version of this towards the holiday season last year in conjunction with the county. So in November and December, there was an effort to educate the public on the importance of buying local and supporting local businesses through that process and the impact that it has. And it was spun up in a very short order. So, but with some success. So we believe that a partnership continuing with the county to do a longer, more in-depth educational campaign on the reasons to buy local and support your local businesses is important. And that effort, we've already started undertaking that, and the county is helping with that. That'll be rolling out here soon with some videos of local business owners explaining in their own words why it's important for their friends and neighbors to come in and support each other. So that one's already a bit underway, but that did receive support from the group as we went through this process. And the other two would be brand new programs. One would be a co-op marketing effort in which we would potentially reduce the cost of advertising and help with production assistance. And a co-op type of program would essentially have businesses partner up and support their particular area, whether it be Belmont or West Main or something like that. And they would go in on a collective, if you will, and it would feature each of the individual businesses, but it would also have kind of a wraparound message whereby it would say, visit this area and support these businesses as part of it. And also probably with some, recovery type of messaging as well. The other one is a marketing leverage grant program. This is modeled after a state program that exists through VTC, in which existing businesses that have a plan to market and have the collateral and are ready to go and already doing that, we would come alongside and leverage that to make it go a little bit further in its impact. So those are the two that I wanted to highlight there. These two programs do not exist. We would need to develop them as we would go through this process. Just a quick, those are the highlights of the four big buckets. If you look down at the key at the bottom, it has some indications of which ones need funding and which ones do not, and the length of time, and also the impact and funding levels, just for your information down there. So in kind of summarizing all of this, we have put in an official ARP request through the process that the city manager has developed for the new funds that are coming in. And that request is for $1 million total. And that would break down into funding for the Charlottesville Albemarle Convention and Visitors Bureau, as well as this program. And the way that breaks down is the Visitors Bureau's revenue due to the transient occupancy tax in the city and county has been reduced by about $1.5 million. And since the city and county both fund that entity, the request that we're both making through the ARP process is for half of that, so $750,000 to go directly to the CACVB to replenish their lost revenue, which is it's actually spelled out in the ARP legislation specifically in terms of helping hospitality revenue replacement and, marketing organizations that assist communities. So that's certainly an appropriate use of the funds. If you all see fit to do that, the county is also putting in a request for a similar amount. This is similar to the process that we undertook during the CARES process, in which we committed funds to CACVB, as did the county. So the remainder of the $1 million request, the $250,000, would go to funding the items that have the little diamond like chevron here that you see. Those are items that need funding that's not been identified as of yet. So should you all, when you make your appropriations for the ARP at a future meeting, that request of that $1 million will be included, as will many others. But that will be when we would seek your assistance in moving this forward by appropriating funds to allow the ones that are marked here to happen. The other ones, we have either grant funds, operational funds, or existing funds already available, and those can proceed. But the ones that are marked with that diamond are the ones that are in need of specific funds. The other point to make is that all of these are scalable up or down. So if there are additional funds that become available either immediately or later, or if you choose to put more towards a business support effort, all of these can be increased. They can also be decreased if you choose to do less than the million or what have you. But that is what we believe is reasonable. And given that there are a number of other needs, and that you all have to consider a balance for the total ARP dollars, which are significant but not certainly unlimited. So with that, I think we'll pause and let you ask questions about any of them or the document that was shared in advance, and we'll be happy to try and answer those questions.
Thank you. Counselors, are there questions? A couple.
I'm just curious, Chris, of just your staff capacity, because there's a lot of initiatives that you've kind of laid out here, and is funding considering both staffing as well, or is it literally programmatic?
This funding is programmatic. We do have 2 vacancies in our office, as you're aware. We're trying to fill one of those right now, and then we'll quickly follow with the other. So that is a little bit of a challenge in the short term, but I think we will get there. This is a 12 to 18 month plan. So, implementing it is not contingent upon filling those, but assuming we fill those in 2 or 3 months, we should be in good shape to implement the entire plan. If that answers the question.
And then the only other thing, it sounds like you do want at least us to express our support to keep exploring the DORA initiative. Is that kind of where we're at?
Yeah, that initiative, the way it's structured with state law, requires the council to pass an ordinance to allow it to happen. So there's a bit of an internal process that we would need to work through with all the various stakeholders that would impact, for instance, them all, and kind of figure out what that process would be. Jason has already had a lot of conversations internally, as well as with the ABC folks, on what's possible and what's not. But from a policy standpoint, if you all think that it's a terrible idea, then we would prefer not to waste time on that. But if you all think it's a reasonable idea that we should continue to pursue, then we're happy to do that and to bring forward an ordinance for your future consideration. The law changes July 1 to allow it. There's stipulations within the law for comment periods and things like that. So if we are to move on it, and if it's to be impactful in this calendar year, we would prefer to know sooner than later, because it does take, and Jason can correct me on these numbers, but 30 or 60 days to kind of allow public comment and things of that nature. So for it to be useful, potentially this fall, we would need to move on it fairly quickly. So yes, if you all want to discuss that and give us an indication of whether you think it's worth supporting or not, we would appreciate that.
Have we worked through some, because this came up last year during a discussion around TomTom, right? Was that last year or the year before?
It is similar, but I'll let Jason jump in and explain the difference. If
Okay,
Yes, this came up last year, I believe in January, and was approved at the time for TomTom to hold a 3-day event on the mall, pretty similar to the current DORA allowances.
Mhm. So one of my, concerns then was just how do we, because we've had a lot of concerns about drinking in public, drunk in public, like those type of conversations. And I am hoping that we resolve those, that we are not allowing some people just because they purchased it in a, restaurant, when we know that other people are already drinking and that, there's different treatment based on that. So that's one of the things that I think we need to resolve as a city. And I don't know if that's been worked out to this point, or would that be something that you all would be working on if you?
Yes, I mean, that is something that we'd be working on. We've talked with social services and about supportive services for folks that would need some assistance with that. But right now, obviously, drinking on the malls is not allowed. And during specific DORA times, it would only be allowed in specific cups. So I think that's the delineation between the two things. And then the next question is, how do you handle it when it's not in the appropriate cups, is the next thing that needs to be worked out.
Yes, and so based on the citizens who have been challenged by the rules thus far, not being able to drink on the mall, then we know that they are probably not likely to be the ones with a DORA cup. And so that would be one thing that I hope we resolve, where just because they don't have that cup, that they are unfairly treated in some way, because they are not going to understand that you can only drink from certain establishments.
I agree.
Question that I had, unrelated to the DORA issue, is where do we stand with the various festivals and so on that drive so much economic activity for the city that, of course, have been on hold for the last year plus? Are some of them coming back this fall? What's the story?
Good question. I don't have good data on all of those. I know TomTom is talking about something. Jason, do you have insight on that for this year, in the fall?
The TomTom's has been discussing the spring. That's when usually their annual event is, I think. And I don't have any specific information, but I guess most of those festivals and things come through the special events committee and permitting process. And so I'm not sure of the status of is the city accepting those applications and whatnot.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge, is that as I understand from a call I had last week, we're currently not, and that has to be resolved before those can start again. So that's one of the challenges. I guess the next big one would be the film festival, which is typically in the fall. The book festival obviously has passed already. So
I can add that we are beginning to initiate taking the applications for special events, so that right now we're shooting for a September 6th kind of fully operational city again. Any special event that would require city assistance would take 60 days before it could be held anyway. So we're starting to take the applications for those events that would be occurring after the 1st of September.
With the
There's
intention.
often-
Go ahead, Brian.
There's often a chamber music festival in September, for example. Is there any noise about whether that's going to be happening again?
I have not heard.
But Chip, you're saying that we can take those with the anticipation that if people do have a request for a September event, that we can be within that time frame to approve it. Because I know that one of the ones that came up in front of me was a December event. for a nonprofit that had an annual like run or something that they wanted to do. So I'm just kind of curious. So we're going to try to be proactive. So the goal is that by sometime in September, there are active events taking place that have been through the approval process.
Yes, yes. We didn't want to wait until September to start taking the applications. That then would be a 60-day time period. And we're into the winter time then, so that we would be prepared that events could begin in September.
And that means that folks have to be applying by the end of June, first week of July, something like that.
So I had a question around the, so there was one part in here, report that discussed that there were businesses that have made some recommendation. One of them was grant writing that you all thought was too, I guess, time consuming for current staff levels, or I don't think, maybe it didn't say, I can't find it. But then there was in the survey, when businesses was responding to, you know, basically how they kept themselves afloat during this time period, the ability to be able to apply for these grants from the state, federal, local level seemed to indicate their success. So that was just a red flag for me, especially talking to a lot of, the socially disadvantaged, the terminology, businesses during the pandemic who wasn't able to access the grant the way they would have needed to. And so I'm just wondering, how are you all planning to reach them? And then if that is a component of that, while they weren't able to qualify for these grants that kept a lot of business afloat during this time, how can you all help them? That just seems like an important step.
Yeah, the grant writing one is indicated there as under the other suggestions, and it came up. So it came up, but it wasn't a top. It didn't get a lot of votes, so to speak, but it was important and it was mentioned. So we included everything that was mentioned there in that other category. We certainly help folks, particularly with our grants, assist them, and we would typically do a webinar or two in advance of a grant application, as we did in the fall, summer and fall of last year. To help them. And our process, we try and streamline very specifically. But we're not in a position to help write somebody else's grant for, say, a state or a federal grant, so to speak, because there's a little bit more involved with that. We don't have the resources typically to do it. We do partner with the Small Business Development Center that can help with some of that, particularly if they're an ongoing client and they already have a relationship with a counselor there that would have insight into their financials and be able to help. We don't typically have that level of detail. So we didn't feel we're in a position to help them write for other grants, but with regard to our grant processes, we definitely are hands-on with that in helping get ready and then helping them, you know, actually hit the button and submit. And we've talked to people through that on the phone before, and we've met people outside the door to hand us a piece of paper because they couldn't, the digital submission wasn't working for them for whatever reason. So we're definitely helping in that regard, but we're not in a position to write grants for people for other grants, if that explains it.
Yeah, and I've talked to several businesses doing that part and gave some of the feedback on some of those challenges that they were having during the submission last time.
Right.
But, you know, just want to make sure that we're just thinking about that particular slide just stood out for me of, you know, how they managed and then some of the requests. And if we know that it was, you know, from some of those businesses that may have had some of those challenges, because some people didn't apply because they thought that it was, you know, even for hours, that it was a too, you know, like cumbersome of a process. So if we can help fix that, that would just strengthen access to the resources. My other question was sort of along the same lines as I had for the city's monthly financials. if CACVB has made it to this point in the year, like what is the revenue? I know we'll learn more about this, but if we do give that, those dollars, the 750,000, what are they used for? And how did we weigh the direct aid to businesses against giving the money to CACVB for their loss?
Okay. The CACVB budget is it lags, if you will. So it hasn't hit their budget yet, but it will hit this next year and the year after.
Okay,
So the funds are intended to replace the drop for next year and the year after. In terms of how we weighed, the funding, we really kind of backed into it. The calculation for CACVB was determined a month or so ago, based upon where the revenue was. So we know that number pretty well. So that's the basis for the 750. The 250 was, we think, a reasonable effort to put towards a reasonable amount to put towards these other initiatives to make them meaningful. Obviously, if there's more funds available, as I mentioned, they're scalable and we can scale them up. It simply increases the number of grants that we could do, or it increases the amount of technical assistance we could provide. But we believe even at the 250 level, it is something that can be impactful.
okay. And depending on revenue projections, could that change the needs of CACVB, or this would be the need no matter what the revenue projections look like?
This will be the need because the months that are being funded have already happened, if that makes sense. So we had part of a COVID year, a fiscal year ago, and then we had a full year of COVID impact. So their future dollars are based upon those past years. So they're pretty well locked in. It won't be any less.
Okay. And then my other question was there was an example of creating like if there was it's under the additional information and best practices. There are an instance where business associations could exist, but there could be additional funding for those. Is this just the Downtown Business Association, or were you all also thinking like Barracks or other locations in this section?
Other locations, the corner has a fledgling business association. West Main Street has had one before. DBAC has been around a long time, but there could be others, but we were thinking more broadly.
Okay. And is this back to the idea of like the shopping cart or something that came up a few months ago?
Is that the gift card?
Is that the type of support, or would it be different?
No, I mean, the report is referencing the fact that in many communities, business associations are very active and they help the businesses that are their members be successful. And if there was an opportunity to help a business association get started with some city dollars or continue with some city dollars, that could be a useful use of funds. We're not suggesting that as a plan of action here, but that was discussed. You all hear from the Downtown Business Association often. Many other communities have many other models whereby they do help fund either through a real estate tax, a business improvement district tax, or through a contract whereby the city simply contracts for services for a particular area and the business association provides those services. We've never gotten to that point locally, but those are options that are available. And there's a couple examples. Stanton is one, Roanoke's another, whereby those contracts exist. And those are methods whereby cities can support the initiation and growth of a business association for purposes of helping those businesses in that area kind of grow and prosper.
Okay, so that would be something that you all would flesh out more. Would that come back to us, or is that something that you would potentially cover out of this $1 million request?
That would be a future conversation. That's not included. The 15 items you see on the graphic that I shared are the items that we would attempt to address with the the ARP funds or existing dollars. That was simply mentioned as something that has come up. It's been a long-standing kind of desire to have kind of a more permanent DBAC and or other business associations locally. And we just wanted to point out that there are models whereby cities engage in that. And, you know, we can decide to further explore that in conjunction with you all, if you all see fit moving forward.
And my last point, and I made it before, but just want to make it again in terms of the buy local. Part of what I heard during the pandemic was that there were businesses that didn't cater to local people. So when there was not the influx of tourism and the UVA students, then that presented a challenge. So I hope that becomes a part of the campaign to just make sure that even if we move back into this kind of robust economy, that economy driven where businesses may only, you know, typically do, you know, advertising to like tourism students or faculty that's in town, that it leaves the local community out. So they're not familiar with that business in a time of crisis, like we experienced during COVID, to know that that is a place to support.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that can be part of that campaign, so that it's just an ongoing effort, no matter how well we're doing or not, then that I think will help people become more familiar with businesses and know that that is a place that they can, you know, go in times when they may be the only people supporting the business.
That's a good point. And the intent of this is to be ongoing and sustainable campaign. And it's really to be an educational campaign to citizens, to encourage them to understand why it does benefit them. One of their neighbors may work at a restaurant, and, you know, by patronizing that restaurant, you're helping your neighbor, and trying to help connect those dots is the theory behind the buy local, as opposed to advertising a particular business, although some businesses do get highlighted through whatever mechanism you use, in this case, videos or social media, things like that. But your point's well taken. Appreciate it.
I just have
Good question. Okay.
a couple thoughts. One is I was reading recently that the General Assembly later this summer is going to be allocating their portion of ARP money. And I had seen part of that the General Assembly is seriously considering allocating some amount of that to tourism, which my understanding could go to tourism boards. So I just wonder if, you know, potentially that money from the state government has any possibility of covering some of that request from the tourism board. And if that money doesn't come or doesn't cover the gap, you know, I'm very curious to know what data and research exists about what is the actual return on investment to the tourism board, and what return on investment do we actually expect and anticipate, recognizing that the ARP money is limited and it's all about trade-offs and ensuring that we're making an investment that's having the most positive impact on our community. And I'm definitely curious to see what, if any, data exists about, again, what kind of measurable impact investment in the tourism board has. And the final thought is, you know, I'm definitely potentially open to the idea of the DORA, but I do still have questions, a lot of which revolve around some of the points the mayor brought up around enforcement, as well as disparities in enforcement throughout the downtown mall, as well as some other questions. But I am open to it, but still have questions, and couldn't say that I'm like 100% behind it at this point.
Okay, thank you. I'm not familiar with the state funds that you referenced, and they may in fact go to tourism. I don't know if that's going to trickle down to local tourism or DMOs. It's likely to go to the state, and the state will then do a grant program or something of that nature. We'll have to look into that. There is some data that the state has and that our local bureau has. I can have Courtney Kukashian, the executive director, share some of that with you with regard to ROI and the local impacts in the city and county. There's a study that's done annually that indicates some of those dollar amounts. So that might be useful, but yeah, thank you.
And one last thought I had on the topic of tourism is that I really think we need to figure out a way to get bathrooms on the mall. I will put that bug out there one more time. It's been, I've had a lot of folks, shop owners and so on saying, I've got more people coming into my store. Sometimes they're coming in saying, can I please use your bathroom? That's not what they want to be doing. That's a need. We need to figure out a way to solve that problem.
That did come up in some of the focus groups. It was mentioned. It's been mentioned for years. There's not an easy solution, but it was mentioned. And I think as a community, we have to continue to look for a solution to that.
Okay, any other questions?
Before we wrap up, it sounds like there's some support for consideration of the DORA. Is there any objection to bringing back an ordinance for consideration, or?
Let me say, I would have support for it in concept. I'd like to see the details, but yes, I'd like to go forward with it.
Same.
I would need more information before I could say either way.
And likewise, like I said, that's where I'm at as well.
Sina, can you take your mic off?
You want to do it write it in the chat, Sina?
And it's even when you propose an ordinance, it sounds like there still is kind of a pilot period by which we'd be kind of testing the waters.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. And I think, from what I'm hearing from Councilor Payne and Mayor Walker, I mean, those are the important questions that we need to consider and flesh out all the answers on how things like that are going to be handled before we actually put that into place. And I think that's, obviously those are going to be some discussions with a lot of different staff in the community on how we're going to do those type of things that we need to have before we can actually put forth an ordinance. But I think having some direction from you all to actually work through those processes and come up with solutions and how to address those things is what we're looking for.
And there are other communities that are going to be going through the same process, so we can potentially engage with them to see how they're handling it and what their solutions might be as it goes forward. But it does seem like there's at least some support for putting together an ordinance for your consideration.
And Councilor McGill has shared, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor McGill has shared that she's knowing for more about how it would work and willing to entertain it, and also working with social services in the Haven, and additionally seeing if this can work in other areas of the community beyond the mall as well.
And council would
now?
always.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you now.
So the other thing, I would like, if we're developing something like this, I don't want it to be mall focused. I want to make sure that if we're developing it, that it can be developed for all areas of Charlottesville. It's one to make sure because we have other areas that we want to also increase business traffic to. And how can something like this be worked in multiple different venues?
That's how it would be developed. It's not specific to the mall. It just happens to work well at the mall because there's no traffic and it's set up as a pedestrian area already. But it would be set up such that public right away could be used for the designated refreshment area, pending approval and meeting the criteria that are established.
Localities can have up to 3 designated outdoor refreshment areas within their bounds, according to ABC.
Any more questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Mr. Willow will open it up for public comment.
Thank you, Mayor Walker. We have 4 people in the audience right now. If you'd like to address council, click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. If you're joining us via telephone, you can press *9. There will be opportunities to address council at the 6:30 meeting as well. And right now, Mayor Walker, I do not see any hands.
Okay. All right.
We do have one. As soon as I say it. Brandon Collins, you're on with council. You've got 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, City Council. I'm Brandon Collins. I am a lifelong city resident and I work for FAR, the Public Housing Association of Residents. We're the recognized resident council and resident advisory board. I just wanted to raise some questions about training, some of the stuff you discussed today and how we can better integrate Section 3 training, particularly around construction work, using, the idea that we need to build back better as sort of a backdrop for how we can improve that. So there was a lot of collaboration with the city on GO programs previous to the pandemic and had just kind of gotten to the point where our sort of first adventure into something that was compatible with Section 3 and getting public housing residents jobs in the construction be hired on to do the work of rebuilding their communities. And then the pandemic hit, which made it really hard to do that training. But I think now we're in a position where in-person, hands-on training in specialized fields could be very helpful to contractors and subcontractors involved in our Phase 1 projects and getting geared up for our Phase 2 projects. So I would really encourage y'all to be looking at some GO programming as part of this effort in the construction trades, because it's not just public housing. There's going to be a lot going on now that the pandemic is sort of waning a little bit, and those jobs are going to be needing to be filled. And as we know, the more qualified folks we can get up and ready with subcontractors, more likely those subcontractors will participate more fully in Section 3 and make this whole thing pop a little bit better than what it's doing. So I know it's hard with Holly Lee having left the city, but I really, really want to make sure that when we're talking about economic development and job training, employment training, that we are very much focused and partnering with the city and the Housing Authority on Section 3 training and opportunities.
Thank you.
And there are no other hands, Mayor Walker.
Any comments? No. All right. And so, Ms. Robertson, is it, are we okay to go into closed session before 5:30?
Yes, I think you can do that as long as you're reading the motion in an open session. Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. So, Ms. Councilor Hill, would you?
Yes. Pursuant to Section 2.23712 of the Virginia Code, I hereby move that the City Council close this open meeting and convene within a closed meeting as authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.23711A1 for discussion and consideration of prospective candidates for appointment by City Council to various boards and commissions of the city government.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Thomas?
Mayor Walker,
Yes.
Vice Mayor McGill,
Yes.
Councilor Hill,
Yes.
Councilor Payne,
Yes.
Councilor Smook.
Yes.
All right.
Mayor, would you need me for anything on this one?
We won't. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And then when we come back, we're coming back to a different meeting, correct, Brian?
That's correct.
Correct. Thanks.